Well, I don't usually turn the camera on myself. I'm usually only filming what I'm doing, but today's a special day, and I've also borrowed Baffy's tablet for this part because my phone's really shit, as I found out, because when I use the rear-facing camera, it only films for 30 seconds. And I've also decided to go and sit in our barbecue area because the sun was in my eyes before, making me squint. I was hoping to have the solar panels behind me, but you've seen enough of my solar panels, I would dare say. So yeah, anyway, philosophy behind what we're doing here. Well, the philosophy is to basically be off-grid. That's the driving factor. That's the motivation. So we're kind of doing whatever we need to do to be off-grid. And we don't have a lot of money, so basically built the system up to be cheap. And in that sense, it's been entirely successful. I mean, there's room for improvement, but we're off-grid now. We have been for 666 days, and we don't have a power bill. And let me tell you, that is great. You know, now it's like we can pay our rates and not get behind. That's property taxes for you Americans out there. And we can afford to go to cool places like Castle Point, etc. more often. The system's completely paid for itself, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm just here to say that anyone, you know, that thinks that maybe they can do this, well, you know, you can actually do this. It is possible, and you don't have to be 100% off-grid. I mean, what made us jump to the full off-grid thing was the threat of a smart meter being installed, which is something I'm just totally not into. So we decided to pull the plug on the grid. That way we don't have any meter. We've still got our analog meters sitting on the now dead DB board inside. So that's why we went from, you know, 90%, 95% off grid to 100%. And I still don't know how we managed to get rid of those extra 3 units that were accumulated on the grid each day. They just sort of poof, magically disappeared once we were off grid. So, you know, it's completely doable. We're doing it in a really old school kind of way. I think that's what I really want to say. We're doing it kind of like how off-gridder might approached it in the mid to late 80s maybe, you know, when solar panels used to cost like $1,000 for a 100-watt panel. So we're sort of doing it that way. But of course we have the luxury of the panels being really cheap. So we can sort of do things the way they did it, but have lots of panels. So it works really well that way. In other words, we've shifted a lot of our main energy needs away from electricity altogether, like using the coal range during winter for heating and cooking and that kind of thing, and hopefully heating the hot water again, and of course picking up the slack with a bit of LPG, you know, with a Califont and LPG gas rings and stuff for cooking in summer. So, you know, it's the old school way, you know, the old school way of being off-grid. If you didn't have much solar power, you just save that power for your electronics and your lights, which is pretty much what we do. Although we do have enough that in the lighter seasons we can boil an electric jug and make coffee and stuff like that. And we even run a dishwasher, of course, and an automatic washing machine. So we're not really living primitively. Like to go further off-grid with the garden and stuff, but that's been a bit difficult this year with the weather, and spring hasn't been the best. And oh yes, and I should tell you, and Baffy being pregnant, of course, she was working quite hard in the garden last season, but this time around I don't think she'll be bending over so much there, so I think our garden won't be that great. Working on a bit of house renovations at the moment, getting our office finally sorted out, so that's what I'll be doing after I finish shooting this video. So yeah, that's basically the philosophy here, to be off-grid, to focus being off-grid, you know, and whatever you can do with solar power, it's awesome. Even if you just get a little setup going that runs some stuff in your shed or gets your lights off the grid, that's, you know, a great start. And if the bug bites you, you know, I've seen people start off with relatively modest stuff, and then 6 months later I've watched their YouTube video and they've got all this crazy gear going on there, you know, and that's pretty cool. So I'm going to try and shout out to a few people now. I'm hoping I'll remember everyone. One of the good things about remaking this video is I can try and get the names that I forgot. So first of all, it was really Julian Eilert who I first started watching on YouTube with his experiments with solar power, just when he was bringing out the PWM5. So, you know, I'm really glad that I've got one and they work well. And of course, there's Adam Welch, of course, who does his solar power stuff in England too. I like watching these English videos for some reason, and these solar sheds, and that of course reminds me of Martin Doyle with his stuff too in his shed. So hi to all you guys. And of course then there's people with the bigger systems, and like Chris DIY, I like your stuff, and like watching you do your stuff, and Phil from Solar Power Electricity and Electronics. It's really good that you got that inverter sorted out and everything like that, and you know, the more you get off grid the better. You know, you don't have to be 100%, but if you can just keep developing it, you'll get there basically, eh? And of course at this point I guess we should mention, well, I'll mention Steve, of course. Steve I really like. He seems to be living a really out off the grid kind of lifestyle, and his videos are really cool as well. And who else? Oh, of course, Andy Reynolds. Andy Reynolds, I have his book, the second edition of his solar and wind power book, which was a really cool read. Really good to read an actual paper book, you know. Well, I don't read a lot of ebooks, to be honest. Yeah, Andy Reynolds, I like his stuff because his system kind of reminds me a little bit of mine, a bit Frankenstein, a bit, you know, wires all over the place and stuff like that. It's not a tidy kind of thing, what I do, you know, and using old meters and stuff, which is the kind of stuff I like to do too. I do like to use the vintage stuff if I can, if it's working, and you know. What else have we got? Oh, MJ Lawton, of course. I used to watch his solar stuff and his later on his test equipment stuff. I thought I would get into building that power supply project he had going, but I didn't really get around to doing that. But maybe I will build it up. I do actually need a decent bench power supply. I'm sick of rigging up 12-volt batteries occasionally with 1.5-volt torch batteries to get that voltage up a little bit more for my bench power supply work. So I should build that friggin' power supply. BigClive.com, yes, well, you know, he's opened up so many things for me that I don't need to open up now, and I know what's inside them, so that's going to save me quite a bit of opening up shit, you know. That's pretty cool. And I guess Arve as well, to that extent too. He opens up and wrecks some really expensive things, so you can see what's inside them. But yeah, and oh, there's lots of others. Even yeah, Starry Hilda, and I hope you're getting better, Starry. I really just learnt about that the other day, and I thought that was pretty sad. Yeah, and okay, well, hopefully I haven't forgotten anyone, and if I have, you know, just make a comment or something like that. But last but definitely not least is Reverend John O'Toole. A special shout out to him because I think he's the one guy who watches nearly all my videos, even when they're not on solar power, even when they're just about a trip into town or a ride on the Esplanade train. So, yeah, cheers for that, John, and also he gets it about the whole pagan thing too, which is kind of cool. Which, you know, that's something that I know the seasons are very important to pagans, but they're also very important when you're off the grid, you know, because the seasons mean everything. The solstices become quite important in a very real way, as I'm sure all of you realise. The winter solstice, summer solstice, the equinoxes, you know, and the days in between, which, you know, the Celtic cross-quarter days also mean quite a lot for me in terms of solar power, because, you know, when it sort of gets to Samhain, that's when things start getting crappy for solar production, and when things get to the day of Imbolc, which was never my favourite seasonal day, things start to look a bit better. So those kind of days have a meaning, and of course they relate totally to gardening and other sort of pursuits like that are important to off the grid. I like to build my own shit, you know. I've got nothing against flashy bits of kit like, you know, having Midnight Solar or Magnum or stuff like that. It's all great stuff, and if I've got a chance to pick up some nice piece of kit, like I think my Freedom Marine inverter for what it is was fairly nice for its age, and I got it really cheap, you know, but stuff like that, you know, I'll happily use it, you know, but I also like to build my own stuff up, and yeah, and it works quite well. One of the things about my system that I'm highly focused on is to have cheap batteries. Like, one day I do want to ransom. Yeah, ransom. That's another name there. Like him, I want to get some nickel iron batteries. When I start to spend some serious money on batteries, I think that's a really good way to go. But until then, I want to try and make my system so I can get away with running like cheap batteries, like second-hand AGMs, and even starter batteries in my system. You know, if you strike a bit of rapport up with your local garage and stuff, you can get these batteries real cheap, and if they die real quickly, you can just kind of trade them and stuff like that, you know, and make it not too dependent on spending a lot of money on batteries, because if you want to go off grid and you want it to be economical, of course batteries are going to be the killer. If you wreck expensive batteries, use them up, then, you know, you're going to kind of be fucked. So yeah. And also, living in Shannon here, we get a lot of overcast days, which is a bit like the guys in England. So that's why I'm partly interested so much in what they're doing, because my goal is really to make a system that uses as minimum amount of generator as possible for most of the year. And I don't think I really need to get it down to 0 runs of the generator, but if I could make a 10-litre can of petrol last a fortnight, which at the moment it lasts usually a week during the darkest seasons when I have to run the generator, if I could make it, I'd be pretty happy, you know. But to that extent, it's all about what I can harvest during the not so good days. So I'm not worried about efficiency on really sunny days, so I don't mind booting off a bit of power on those ballast bulbs that I use and stuff like that, or Lydia charge controllers or anything like that, because it's the energy that I'm trying to harvest on shitty days is what's really important, because we get a lot of shitty days, you know, which is why I'm not a big fan of MPPT, but that's why it hasn't featured in a major way in my system, because, you know, it doesn't offer much help on the days when it's overcast and stuff. Well, I don't think it does. In my experiments, I've found the most power you can get from a panel on a day like that is when you connect it straight to the friggin' battery, you know, straight to the battery, no charge controller, no nothing. You know, nothing seems to beat that. Putting panels in series on a shitty day and feeding them into a battery always yields less power than just putting them in parallel. Oh, okay, that's another thing, series parallel stuff. I like to stay in parallel as much as possible. It makes things simpler. That's why a lot of my system's actually 12 volts, because that way I can just parallel up as many 12-volt panels as I require and have them all pointing at different angles into the same charge controller, and it doesn't matter diddly squat, you see. And that's real handy for our property, because there's trees surrounding us and stuff, so you're not going to get sort of the best harvest if you just point your panels in the textbook sort of position, which of course is basically north here in New Zealand. So being able to connect panels at different angles and parallel together, and also the same thing with batteries. If you're running 12 volts, you can just parallel up your batteries, and you don't have to worry too much about mixing different ages and different sizes of batteries. Whereas if you've got a series set of batteries, you better make sure they're all, you know, of the same age and the same size, or you're basically fucked. So parallel offers a lot of advantages there. So, you know, but 12 volts has its disadvantages. You know, I don't try and draw more than 1,000 watts off a 12 volt system in one go. So the biggest inverter I have on a 12 volt system is 1,000 watts, and I never overload my inverters or go anywhere near the maximum rating. That's why they last and they don't blow up, because, you know, I believe in running everything quite light. So, you know, some people might look at my system and go, oh, fuck, that looks dangerous. Well, it's not actually, because everything is being run really gently. Nothing is being pushed. So there's no copious amounts of heat building up anywhere and stuff. And everything's within the ratings of the cables and whatnot, you know. So, I mean, that's obviously the main thing. I know some people like the nice thick cables. That seems to be a really trendy thing at the moment. And that's all good. Lower resistance is all good. You know, nothing wrong with that. You can't knock that. But sometimes it's going a bit overboard. You know, as long as your cables are rated for safety rating of the sort of currents you're going to be pushing, well, then more is nice, you know, in terms of size, but it's not 100% necessary. But in a way, though, my cables are quite thick for the currents I run, because like I say, I try and keep the currents relatively low. That's, you know, I've got a lot of different battery banks there, and so, you know, I could be running lots of different things in the house, and they're all running off different inverters, different battery banks, so there might be a total power usage of quite a bit, but, you know, when you divide it up between all the different circuits, it's really not that much. And the other thing is too, is that I keep all the high current stuff out of the house. I don't want to burn my friggin' house down, for fuck's sake, you know. So I keep it all in the shed, so if the worst ever came to the worst and something did smoke up and catch fire, I might burn down a shed and lose a few panels and a few batteries, but we're not going to lose our house. So, you know, safety is important. It's just, you don't have to go overboard on it and be all wanky about it, you know. Just got to be sensible, know what you're doing, and, you know, I do know what I'm doing. I've been playing around with electronics since I was a toddler. Seriously. I had a break for a few years there where I followed the heavy metal dream, but, you know, I'm back into it now, and, you know, none of the knowledge I picked up when I was younger I lost. I've just got a bit more sensible with it, you know. Yeah. Well, you know, so I think that's about it, really. I've pretty much expressed quite a bit here. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this video. I mean, I think it's going to have to be several videos. I think it's going to have to be several videos. I mean, shit, you know? Yeah. But, you know, if you're thinking about solar power, you're doing solar power, you know, it's good. It's a good thing to do. And, I say, everyone I watched, I think they're all doing really, really well, you know? It's something you can do for yourself, and you can feel good about doing it yourself, you know? You can feel good about it. Yeah. So there we go. 18 minutes on Baffy's tablet. Probably using up all the memory card. So that's day 666 of the grid. I'm not going to film anymore. See you later.